Yes, it's undoubtedly true that in all religions there are exclusive statements. So, for example, in our Christian religion, you have the statement, there's no other name under heaven whereby we must be saved. Or the statement, no one comes to the Father but by me. What do you think of statements like that?
I believe those are courageous statements. And those are statements that are believed by thousands, millions of Christians. And I believe that. But that doesn't mean that I am thereby opposed to someone else who has a different understanding of that. I also, while I believe it for me, I'm not going to impose it on someone else. And furthermore, I am going to let God make those judgments. I'm not going to try to make any of those judgments. That's the humility part that I argue for. It needs to be turned on underneath. There's another mic coming. There we go. There we go.
Thank you. This is a really simple question. I was taking notes, and the last thing you said was misted over by the breath of our own humanity. Mm-hmm. Was that Jane Goodall or someone?
That was the quote from Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall. Thank you.
And we look through various windows, and those windows are misted over by the breath of our own humanity.
That's a great quote. Yep. Sort of like the veil.
Yes, I was at a gathering today, and it was at Aquinas, and it was a non-denominational gathering, and we were talking about that God is in every one of us. God is in the summer, spring, winter, and fall, and not one group of people has just the right answer. So we talked about tolerance, just as you did. And I found when I first came to Grand Rapids, I came from a big city, I was totally floored. It was quite a few years ago. Things have changed here. People have become more open and more accepting. I'm Jewish, and when I first came here, the neighborhood that I was in asked me what church I went to, and I told them that I went to a synagogue. They were totally dumbfounded. They said, "What is that?" And we never met a Jew. You're nice. And so today is a very different story. And, I'm very thankful. I think Grand Rapids has done great growing. And hopefully will continue to grow. So.
Thank you. I'll tell you my own story. When we moved here, we lived in Hudsonville. It was close to just south of campus. We found an acreage there, and we really liked it. And our realtor said, by the way, this part, it's northern Georgetown Forest, if you know that area, this part is integrated. I said, oh, that's interesting. Really? Yes, 2 blocks over there's a Baptist living. So it is true that West Michigan has some very strong ethnic, religious traditions. And I guess my approach to this is that that's not bad. It's bad if you insist that someone that's not in your group has to be like you. But it's not bad to have a deep faith. What I urge, and I hope that this community is doing, is that it's finding that as it understands that faith even deeper, it finds a willingness, an openness to others, and maybe an awareness that we may not have, our little community, our little tribe, our little tradition may not have the final answer. We may be just having a piece of understanding of the total. And that not only do we need to tolerate and respect, we need to learn from other traditions. We need to learn principles there. That's what holy envy is always about.
Hello, thank you so much for this incredible talk. And my husband and I are new to the Grand Valley community. We came half a year ago from Valparaiso University, and where we had been very active in interfaith devotionals, actually, that we organized there. And so we've been doing that, living in Hudsonville for some 3 months now, interfaith devotionals. And we had been thinking about and wondering how to start such an initiative on the campus, because it is just this incredible beauty when reading the holy writings of all the faiths and seeing how they just in such beautifully different ways say the same thing, and how, at least in our understanding as Baha'i, is also how it's the same source coming and inspiring them all. And so, we're wondering now, okay, how can we help the process?
You're at the campus now, you said? You're at Grand Valley? Okay. There are actually a dozen or more faith-based groups, student groups at Grand Valley. Some of them are very open to this kind of thing, and we are going to be meeting with them. That's one of the initiatives that we have for our 2012 Year of Interfaith Understanding, is to get those student groups, those that are willing and want to be part of it, get those students groups to participate in the kind of thing that you've described. She has something else to add.
And is it then also possible for the Baha'i community to be officially part of that?
Certainly. We are not excluding. As I said, my own background, it comes more from the Abrahamic understanding, and Baha'i is another approach to this. Now, I think it's important. I think it's important to not downplay our own individual beliefs. I think particularity is important, and to say just everybody's all the same, I think it's not helpful. I think it's important to recognize where we differ, and that enables us to grow. And understanding that difference is the exciting part of the dialogue. That's what the Faith Club is all about. I think that's what interfaith dialogue is all about. It's when you realize that we're not the same, and we're not maybe asking the same questions, that we can learn.
Thank you for a very excellent talk. I really appreciate it. And it's very easy to talk like this in a community where we're very safe. But I wonder what we would say to people who have just lost a young child in a suicide bombing, or someone who has just been killed by an Israeli soldier, or whose father had just been killed by an Israeli soldier. I guess I have a tough time relating to that situation over there when I sit here.
I understand, and you recently came back from Israel, as I did last year. It's tough. As I said, there are parts of the world in which tolerance is the first step, and we're not even there yet. There's no question about that. And I've also tried to illustrate that this is not unique to today. This has been going on not only in American history, but in world history. But what's unique today is that the stakes are so much higher. The stakes are so high. A flare-up in Palestine, Israel, or a terrorist bombing someplace can lead to a significant worldwide war and issues and major destruction. I guess when you say, what do you say to these people? You have to, first of all, understand and respect where they're coming from, as I've tried to indicate, and be sympathetic with them, and not try to tell them, well, it's all okay. It's not. It's not okay when a loved one is killed. But we then have to ask the larger question, what are we going to do about these terrible things that happen? Are we going to escalate and make the situation worse? Are we going to keep trying to look at a world where understanding and acceptance and respect can lead us to a different kind of world than we have now? We're not a perfect world. At least the Christian religion doesn't argue that we are perfect. A big part of the Christian belief is that there's this thing called sin, and we all have it. And so we, at least in my tradition, we can't deny that. We have to accept that. But that doesn't mean we can't look on the hope of making peace through understanding.
What is a good way to encourage dialogue among people whose primary goal is to win the debate or to convert?
Well, debate. A debate is something where when you're done, you haven't changed your mind. There's a winner, there's a loser. I mean, I was in debate in college, and I remember we always loved coming home with a trophy. We were the winners. Debate is that kind of thing. you have to approach it from the standpoint of conversation or listening, is what I'm saying. And being respectful of the other person and wanting to learn from them may engender a similar kind of thing back. Now, I'm a firm believer in what I call self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, if everybody thinks the economy is going to tank, it probably will. If everybody thinks that something can't be done, you know, we're not going to be able to accomplish whatever it is, if everybody thinks that, it won't get done. Negative self-fulfilling prophecy is almost 100%. Positive self-fulfilling prophecy isn't 100%, but it's a better way to live. And when you prophesy, when you act as if things are going to get better, you got a chance of it getting better. When you act as if the enemy is always the enemy and never deserves any love, never deserves any respect, if you act that way, that prophecy will be fulfilled as well.
I just have a comment. One of the things that I enjoy about my professional engineering activities is that it always seems like we end up with an interfaith discussion at some point when the formal conference activities are over, and there are people from all over the world and all different faith traditions, and somehow when we talk about why this screw broke in half, we can all communicate. And so I know you've done some work with science, and maybe you have some comments on how to bring the scientific or technical method of discussing things into the interfaith movement.
Well, I don't think that everything is resolved using the methods of science. I think that's a big fallacy that is being perpetrated by people like Richard Dawkins and others who think that that is the road for all forms of truth. And I take that out of my own experience. Mathematics is a different method than science, and yet science needs mathematics and uses mathematics all the time. The course that I mentioned was called Ways of Knowing. Scientific method is a way of knowing. Even the sciences themselves, though, have different methods. You approach things differently if you're a biochemist than if you're a solid-state physicist, or if you're a sociologist. I mean, we have different methods. You don't have to deny the unity of reality. Reality is still unified to have different methods and ask different questions and to have different approaches. So I guess as far as coming from the science, my experience with the science community and dealing with the issues of science and religion, that's what I would say, is that even in the sciences we take different approaches, and that's okay. You know, it's really interesting. You don't hear biologists running around saying, "Oh, those physicists, I wish they just weren't even part of the world anymore. I mean, I don't know why they do what they do." I mean, there's a kind of a base level respect between the sciences, and maybe that's the lesson we can take to other kinds of discussions. The question down here.
I'm not so sure about the physicists, but I guess you mentioned, particularly when you had the Dalai Lama quote, that this does seem to presuppose a kind of openness. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, but you talked about the rays of hope, and you see some. But I wonder if you wouldn't comment on what seems to be, I mean, you can't have a ray of darkness. I guess it would be an encroaching shade or something. Particularly in Jewish tradition as well as Christian tradition, there was a spirit of, when you look back, there's a sort of tolerance of open inquiry. That is, you see the different positions that are capable within either faith tradition, suggesting that it was acceptable to be inquiring. And in recent times, I can't help but think that some of that seems to be lost. That is, there's less openness to the thought that this is still a sort of ongoing discovery. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you agree, or if you had any, perhaps, venture an explanation.
I understand the point. It's certainly the case that politically and in certain religious areas, we have become a polarized community. There's no question about that. That's the reason I found it interesting on the immigration law, that there was the bipartisan support and bipartisan disagreement. We have become polarized, and maybe we're starting to see the dangers of that, and maybe we're moving away. I guess a couple of responses. One is that if you look at it historically, the movement has been towards more understanding. We are living in a world where we have to face the stranger. For many centuries, millennia, you could live your entire life with a community, same religion, same language, same beliefs, same job that your father had. I mean, all of that. And the world has changed, and we are being exposed to more and more different ideas and different kinds of people. When Jim Carroll was here for our interfaith dialogue last year, 2 years ago now, I guess, 2009, he made the point of that doctrine doesn't change until experience changes. He gave us a wonderful example of the cardinal from Boston who was upset with one of the priests that was running around saying there's no salvation outside the church. And what was not known by everyone is that his sister had married a Jewish person, and every Sunday after Mass he went and had dinner with his sister and her husband. And it was the personal experience that led him to a more understanding and a different approach to how you treat those that are different. Now, the other comment I would make is, I found it really interesting that New York Times article, or that full-page ad, then the Christian response to A Common Word, was written by Yale professors. Okay, you can expect that. There were a lot of other persons that you would expect to have signed on to that. But it was interesting, some of the others that signed on. The president of Fuller Seminary signed on. Rick Warren from Saddleback signed that document. Bill Hybels from Willow Creek. These are seen to be conservative megachurches. They signed on to this document as well. I see those as signs of hope. Now, are we there yet? No, we're a long, long ways. And I think there's a real possibility that this could all come unraveled. That's possible. But I think that makes it more incumbent upon us than to do everything we can to push it in the positive. I don't know if that helps.
I'm trying to collect my thoughts here so I can either ask my question intelligently or make a comment. I'm still a little hung up on the question about connecting this to the war, and I have a deep belief that we're not fighting a religious war, which we've been led to believe. We're fighting a political war of convenience for resources. And I think what I'm trying to get to is how important it is to understand Islam and educate ourselves so that we truly know, rather than the propaganda we're fed or what we're being told is about Islam, when in fact that may not be true. We've also got, I think we have to, as people who are in this room just asking this question, we have an obligation to educate ourselves about what we think we know about the other religion, what we think we know about the stranger. And for example, when my son was in Iraq, he heard the call to prayer every morning. He thought they were calling for his death. He was totally misinformed, when in fact they were calling the common people to prayer. And we just can't let ourselves be misinformed anymore. It's just too dangerous.
Thank you. I would agree very much. And remember some of those principles of dialogue. It's don't compare the worst in the other with your best. And also don't let someone interpret the other, try to find out from that person themselves what their belief is, what they're all about. Get to know people. Get involved in this. And then certainly education is important. As a professor, I'm not going to argue against education. But I'm going to suggest that it be an education of a certain type as much as possible. It's an education of personal experience. getting to know people. I had the wonderful privilege shortly after I was appointed the director of the Kaufman Institute, I was invited to Jerusalem to the Shalom Hartman Institute, where every year they bring together about 25 Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and we spend all week, all day long, studying the texts around a certain theme, the Jewish texts, the Christian texts, and the Muslim texts around that theme. And in your group, they were in small groups, and in our group was always representatives of these traditions, and we heard from them about what these texts they thought meant, and then we interacted with that. And that the experience of working with and talking with someone who has different ideas than I have is a wonderful experience. It's a learning and growth experience, and that's the kind of learning I think we need to do.
I had just another question in that I would like to understand a bit better when you pointed out that it's important to understand our differences. And like, what are the reasons that it is so important to understand our differences rather than looking at our similarities?
Well, there are certainly similarities. I mean, the common word is a strong statement. That what the Muslim clerics and scholars said is that we have something in common with the Christian community: love of God and love of neighbor. No question, we should talk about what we have in agreement. All I'm suggesting is that I don't find it helpful to everybody get around and say, well, we all believe the same thing, and sing Kumbaya and say, oh, isn't it wonderful that we're all in agreement? I think there are real differences, and I think that one learns most by certainly pointing out the things that we have in common, but also exploring those differences. You learn best when you understand and get inside the mind of someone who is different than you are. And I think that's one of the important things. I also think that religions, by their nature, have a particularity to them. The stories that we tell are particular stories. There are particular people, particular stories, particular parables, particular sayings. And those things can't all be reduced to a sort of vanilla, a lowest common denominator, nor should they be, is what I would argue. We want to find out what those particular understandings may enable us to understand. So, yes, let's talk about the things that we agree on, but let's not pretend like that we're all one big happy family. We're not happy all the time.
Dr. Kindschi, what hope do you see, what type of attitude should we have toward those who do not want to engage in dialogue with that? I'm thinking specifically of extremist Muslims who have declared holy jihad in the U.S. that think of us as the great Satan, or the members of the Westboro Baptist Church who go and protest, have no intention of, in their words, saving people, but they're just there to declare you're going to hell. That's all we want to do, is declare you're going to hell. What can we gain from people with that type of mindset?
What can we gain? I guess maybe a little reality about the way the world is and how much progress is yet to be made. I certainly don't defend those attitudes, and I don't excuse them. On the other hand, I don't ever want to be guilty of sinking to that level, of taking their level. Let's try to move the conversation up. If we can't succeed, okay, we haven't. But whatever we do, let's never take the conversation down to the level of those that we don't respect. I get very concerned when I hear someone saying, well, we shouldn't allow anyone to build a mosque in America until Saudi Arabia allows Christian churches to be built there. Well, since when was it America's goal to have that kind of an attitude? Aren't we wanting to set the level a little bit higher than that? Aren't we wanting to set a principle of tolerance and a principle of understanding that is higher than the worst possible case that we can find around the world? So I guess that's the way I would address it. It's real. It tells us how serious our problem is, but it's always incumbent upon us not to go to that level ourselves.
And actually, I am protesting that you will never find, there will never be a synagogue built in the independent city-state of Vatican City.
Any others? One more, maybe.
I was really surprised by the number of Christians who believe that non-members of their faith are going to heaven. How do we reconcile those numbers with the levels of intolerance that we're seeing?
Well, you know, intolerance gets more news than tolerance. You know, Mayor Hartwell told me that when that guy in Florida wanted to burn the Quran, he sent to the press a statement. As a Protestant minister himself and as the mayor of this city, sent a statement regarding that. The press didn't publish it. The press was publishing, and I know the press is here tonight, but the press, they did put it on their website. I'll give them that much. They didn't publish that. There are, if you go to the Common Word, you can find hundreds of places where positive statements have been made. You can go and people say, well, how come the moderate Muslims never criticize the violence that's going on? There are websites that you can go to and literally find hundreds of statements that have been made. They don't get publicized. It's the crazy guy that wants to burn the Quran that gets publicized. Worldwide. He's got a congregation of, 30 people, half of which are his family. You know, I know the press gets blamed for a lot of stuff, and I don't want to get in the middle of that discussion because I don't know that it's their fault. The fact of the matter is we tend to want to hear the negative. We don't want to hear the positive. And so I guess there's a lot more tolerant people among the conservative or evangelical Christians than we hear. Maybe we're hearing the ones that have a lot to say, but we're not hearing the large majority and what their attitudes are. I think that there is a movement in this community as well as elsewhere of more understanding, more respect, more acceptance. Is everybody there? No. But I think there's more. And I was surprised myself to see 83% of that particular demographic. And the way the question was worded is it possible? It didn't say they're all going to. It just says, is it possible?
Okay, we good? All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Doug Kindschi. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and don't forget the websites, interfaith-mi.org for Kaufman, interfaithdialogueassociation.org for IDA if you want to be on our e-list, and have a safe drive home.